So I want to see if there's something more with respect to this model in which for people whose developmental environment has been internet first and who have wrongly encoded the lesson that my identity is mine to define and that those who would challenge it are enemies rather than people doing me a favor of giving me information I don't have about myself. They are enemies to be challenged and driven out. Then this interfaces with those of us for whom the internet is not our primary developmental experience in the following way. And I'm using the case of trans ideology simply because it's the clearest case biologically. But if you take the rules of trans, and I actually believe probably these ought to be the rules online, which is you can present as whatever you want, and by and large, people should just simply treat you that way. And you also, by the way, online have the tools to do that so that you're not creating some kind of unresolvable paradox. But if we then say, okay, the online rules are that there's no such thing as sex because a man can become a woman simply by showing up as one. And then we say, whatever must be true in the real world in order for those rules to be the rules everywhere, we are going to make those things true. Therefore, it must be the case that biology was wrong about sex. And what's more, that because simply saying that you are female is sufficient to put you fully in that category, then therefore whatever morphology and physiology you happen to have at the point that you make that assertion is consistent with being female. And we have the absurd discussion that we now see so regularly about basically, female penises and things like this. And so those of us with real world primacy are constantly saying you can't rewrite the rules of civilization around simple claims in isolation, like all you have to do to be female is say that that's what you are. And that battle is one that is now ironically going to be lost in the real world as a result of the fact that actually political power is accumulating in the hands of those who subscribe to the online rules.
So the identity issue is, it forces us to one of the things I found so challenging about all of this is that these challenges to fundamental assumptions force you to make arguments for things you actually don't know how to argue for. So, for example, what does it mean to be female? Well, I don't know because no one's actually ever asked me that question. They just act being female and I act being male, whatever that means. And we don't ever sit down and lay out the explicit assumptions. Now, you do that to some degree when you're arguing with your wife about who's going to do what when, and maybe with your mother and with your sister. You have local discussions when roles come into conflict, but you never list the axioms that you're using to do your perceptual categorization. And so then when you're forced to defend your presumption, you don't know how to do it because you don't have the arguments at hand. So to be female, means something like, what do you do? I had a discussion with one of my former students today. We're trying to help people develop this. We're trying to develop this program that helps people identify and then accomplish important life tasks. And it's forced me to think about something I've thought about over years. What are the important life tasks? Like, okay, so you should get educated to the approximate level of your intelligence. You should be employed gainfully, have a job, or maybe if you're lucky, a career. You need an intimate relationship. You should have some friends. You need a family. You need to regulate the world of temptation, drug and alcohol use, that sort of thing. You have to take care of your health. You need to make some productive use of your time outside of work. So there's 8 things. maybe there's more, but that's sort of 8. And maybe you don't need to be fully accomplished along all of those 8, but they're pretty important and they're not a bad start. And if you can come up with a better list, more power to you. But, well, let's take one. You're going to have a family, an intimate relationship in a family. Well, the classical way of doing that is that someone's male and someone's female, and they get together and they have children, and then they have grandchildren, and that's like a third of your life, or a quarter of your life, or a fifth of your life. I don't care. It's some non-trivial portion of your life. And that identity, male and female, is a precondition to that route through life. And then you have children and they mean something to you and they give you something to do, and you have grandchildren and it's the same thing. So by playing out male and female, it's sort of like you've now occupied 25% of your time productively. That's the role. Okay, let's say we blow that apart. Well, then what? What are we supposed to do then? Because you can't pretend that into existence. And that's the postmodern element of this. This is the refusal of the real world. It's like, okay, we'll make identity entirely mutable. But what the trans kids that came after me in the first demonstration against me, I said, you think I'm your enemy, but I'm not. And the reason I said that, being a clinician, was because I thought, well, you're adopting an identity that there is no rules for. What the hell are you going to do with that? You're inviting so much trouble into your life you can't even possibly imagine it, because you won't know what to do. And people won't know how to treat you. And so where does that leave you? Now, you might say, well, I'm so distraught about the discordance between my psychological state and my biological reality that pales in comparison. And maybe there are situations where that's the case, but man, an identity that doesn't solve the problem of how you're going to live isn't an identity. I don't know what it is, but it's not an identity.
Yep.
And I don't even know how people would change the rules exactly to make that work.
So I agree with you wholeheartedly that effectively our identities are means to an end. And there are conservation laws that apply to the system as a whole. And unfortunately,
Yes.
and this is actually essentially the core argument of the book that Heather and I have just completed. But the core argument is we are living in a period of evolutionary hyper-novelty, where human beings are actually the species for which we have the best tools to deal with novel circumstances that our ancestors did not know anything about, but that the rate of change has become so high that there is no conceivable way for us to keep up with it. And what we are effectively
Even
watching
in
with this
principle.
even in principle,
Yeah.
that the very fact that you can say the environment that we live in is not the one that we were born into, that's way too fast. You may be able to make a discrete jump. Human beings are capable of moving from one habitat to another and figuring out one time what the rules of the new habitat are. But a habitat that is constantly in motion and has become utterly arbitrary with respect to even the most fundamental characteristics is not something to which we can be well adapted, which is causing us to be...
Sounds like a powerful argument for conservatism.
It is.
Yeah,
It's
I know.
100%.
I understand. Well, I do understand. I do understand that. That is, to the degree that I'm conservative in my outlook, that is the reason. It's like